Good morning. Um, Good morning. I'm Shuo-Jun from Yat-sen University. Today, I'd like to introduce our study on the neighborhood scale traffic. Uh, Neighborhood scale traffic pollutant dispersion under weak wind conditions. First, why do we want to investigate the weak wind condition particularly? The urban ventilation is driven by the incoming wind. In many urban canopy models, the pollutant removal rate is determined by the incoming wind speed. Under weak wind conditions, the pollutant and heat are more easily to accumulate, particularly in high-density urban areas. For example, in our previous study of city-scale study, we found that the anthropogenic heat has little impact on the outdoor air temperature when we use the annual average wind speed of Singapore. But if we use a very low wind speed in Singapore, the impact of the anthropogenic heat on the air temperature cannot be ignored. The maximum value of air temperature, pollutant concentration are very important for the urban climate resilience because they have the largest impact on human health. Secondly, what is so special about the weak wind condition? The urban surface absorbs more solar radiation and storage inside. This causes the urban heat island as well as high surface temperature. Sorry, can I go back? I think there's another button, so I need to play. Play. Yeah. Uh, For example, this is our simulation about the anthropogenic heat dispersion in different wind speed under the weak wind conditions. You can see the anthropogenic heat dispersion pattern is quite different under the weak wind conditions. The upward flow actually drives the hot air away from the pedestrian level. This means weak wind conditions do not necessarily cause a bad urban environment. More important, many urban canopy models cannot resolve the buoyancy effect accurately. Thirdly, why do we need to run a neighborhood scale simulation under the weak wind condition? Here, we present our simulation of the airflow under a zero incoming wind condition. The airflow is only driven by the thermal buoyancy at that time. This animation shows the thermal plume attract each other and forms a large plume flow above the rooftop. The interaction between the buildings make a neighborhood scale simulation essential. Now, we understand the airflow is quite different under the weak wind conditions. Then, how about the pollutant dispersion? When we decrease the incoming wind speed, the neighborhood scale flow changes. When there is a strong incoming wind, the buoyancy can be ignored. A typical urban canopy flow forms at this condition. When the incoming wind has a comparable effect on the local buoyancy, and urban plumes forms you can see from the second picture. Then when the incoming wind decreases all the way to zero, the convergence flow forms at the pedestrian level. This urban flow acts as a summer plume under this condition. This indicates the pollutant dispersion pattern can be very different under weak wind conditions. So we choose a real urban neighborhood in Singapore, the Newton Town. The Newton Town is the city center of Singapore with a high building density and traffic volume. The simulation area is about 1.6 kilometers in length and width, and the near building mesh is refined with a minimum size of about 2 meters. So in total, we use about 10 million mesh for our simulation. We use a traffic emission rent was calculated based on the traffic volume and the EU6 emission rent, emission standard. We assume that all the vehicles running on roads meet the standard, and the ratio of different vehicle categories was calculated from the LTA quota, and the traffic volume of the seven main roads at that area was monitored by Singapore LTA in 2015. Our model needed to accurately predict both the buoyancy-driven flow and the pollutant dispersion. So we validated these two processes separately. Firstly, we simulate the pollutant dispersion in building area. The simulation results were compared with a water channel experiment, as you can see from the concentration profile here. And the red one is our simulation, and the black one is the measurement. The mean concentration was well reproduced by the high-resolution LES model. So the second thing we want to validate is the buoyancy-driven flow for a typical numerical wind tunnel, as we want to simulate the wind around building. The boundary conditions and the turbulent model can be selected by many guidelines, for example, the AIJ guidelines or Coast 732 guidelines that are widely used in wind engineering. However, this setup does not work properly under weak wind condition. The velocity at the inlet it cannot be determined before simulation. So we developed a new simulation framework for the weak wind simulation. The model was validated by comparing the velocity field with previous water tank measurement. We tested four turbulent model, two RAS model, and the two LES model in our simulation. The LES model shows huge advantage than RAS model here. Many previous studies suggested that the RAS model has an acceptable accuracy in wind engineering. However, that does not stand for the weak wind condition. Now, we have proved that our model can accurately predict both the buoyancy-driven flow and the pollutant dispersion. We use this model to simulate the urban airflow and traffic pollutant dispersion in Newton. This animation shows how the urban heat dispersion pattern changes with the decreasing incoming wind speed. Under the weak wind conditions, the buoyancy-driven the airflow upwardly, the urban boundary layer becomes higher under the weak wind condition. The pollutant can be transported out of the urban canopy layer and then be easily brought into the downstream by the incoming wind. So, due to the buoyancy effect, the pollutant will not accumulate to a super high concentration under the weak wind conditions. In other words, the urban canopy layer has a sorry. Yeah. In other words, the urban canopy layer has a minimum ventilation capacity. When we calculate the average pollutant concentration increment due to the local traffic emission, the weak wind conditions are actually with lower concentration. Particularly, the lowest concentration was found in a case with a very weak incoming wind. Not that one with the largest incoming wind, the case F, or that one with zero incoming wind. As shown in previous slide, the change in the flow pattern improves the urban ventilation. This effect surpasses the reduction due to the decreasing incoming wind. Although the dispersion pattern changes significantly with the incoming wind, the distribution of the pollutant at the pedestrian level shows little variation with the incoming wind. The main reason is that the incoming wind is near zero at the ground level. So the buoyancy flow dominant the near ground dispersion. This effect was ignored by most city-scale pollutant dispersion model or 2D street canyon models. We hope in the future the newly developed urban canopy model can include this effect. As the weak wind condition is very important for the urban climate resilience. Okay, here comes the main conclusion of this study. First, we found a minimum urban ventilation capacity due to the buoyancy, regardless of the incoming wind speed. Therefore, the maximum heat and the pollutant accumulation are limited. We also found city can have a higher pollutant dispersion range under weak wind conditions if the thermal buoyancy is taken into account. This study was supported by the National University of Singapore and the FRS lab in ETH Zurich. The simulation was run on the National Supercomputing Center in Singapore. I would like to thank them for supporting our research. That is all about my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shuo-Jun, for your presentations. And a question from the audience.
I can speak loud. It's all right. So
We're
what is the
recording,
plan?
sorry.
They're recording it.
All right. Hello. What is the plan there? Because under different wind speed we have advection, right? Horizontal advection taking place. However, the emission from the source is not stopped, right? How do you want to plan this identical the two effects of the dispersion that's vertically as well as horizontal advection?
I think you want to ask how to plan the urban.
So how do you want to design and entangle, like differentiate between the what is the emission source and via the advection? So there are two components coming here, right?
Yeah.
So what's the plan there?
I'm sorry, I don't get your question. What's your plan to
So the turbulence mixing,
mixing? Yeah, right.
that's the one vertical, right?
Yeah.
And that is basically source dominated, correct? And horizontal advection is another transport dominated by the wind speed, correct?
Yeah.
How do you want to quantify these two terms separately?
Yeah, I understand your question. It's a very good question. Actually, we investigate our profiles from the upwind location to the downstream location. We found the most important for the local concentration is not a good ventilation locally, because a good ventilation also indicates more pollutant was transported from the upstream to the downstream. Under the zero incoming wind speed, the traffic pollutant actually was converged from the surroundings to the center part. So a good local ventilation at the center part means that the pollutant can be easily transported out of the urban canopy layer. But the pollutant can also be very easily be transported inside that area. So when we analyzed our results, we found it quite complicated. We found a general conclusion based on the dispersion patterns because we use a real urban area. The geometry is complex and the roads complex and the 3D flow is also very complex. So we just want to make sure that we need to take into account the bounce effect in our future study. And I think there's still many work we need to do in the future because we found we use many 2D 3 canyon model to parameterize our large-scale model for the blue dispersion. But in this case, if we ignore the neighborhood scale flow, and if we ignore the thermal buoyancy, our results can be very wrong in our case. To answer the question, if not, I will discuss with you later.
So in your high resolution simulation,
Yeah.
this temperature was an active scalar or a passive scalar?
You mean the pollutant?
No, the temperature. You talked about buoyancy effect, right?
Yeah.
But in your high resolution simulation, which one we showed, was your temperature an active scalar or a passive scalar?
Active scalar or
Passive scalar.
passive
So does
scalar?
it contribute to its buoyancy?
Yes, it contributes to buoyancy, but the pollutant is
Passive.
passive. Is passive, right?
We have one more question.
Thank you for very impressive work. I think this is the advantage of LES compared to in tunnel, but really hard to something like this. Like this is the actual scale of the tunnel. But I would like to ask, what is in Singapore driven when is driven this finance? If it's in the night, because if it's in the night, is in Thailand actually the pollution is lower, much lower than during the day, and maybe it's
Less traffic.
So I understand that maybe it's counterintuitive that during the stronger rains the pollution is higher, but it's mainly due to due to the addition through the lateral openings of the street canyons, which can maybe accumulate and can be worse than only when through the top openings due to the buoyancy. So my question is, what is more real scenario in Singapore if the heat island is during the night or during the day?
Okay. Yeah, I understand the question. So you want to ask the difference between the night and day, right? Yeah. In the night, maybe we need to consider the atmospheric stratification in the urban scale. So the pollutant tend to be more hard to dilute away from the boundary layer. But if we look into more details in the pedestrian level concentration, the local effect become more important. Additionally, in the urban area, due to the urban heat island effect, the urban stratification is more close to neutral or unstable in our case. And another thing you want to ask is that buoyancy important or not in our case? So we analyze with the data in Singapore, about 1 year data. We found that I don't remember the data accurately, but about 20% of the time, the wind speed is below 0.7 meters per second. So in our based on simulation, that means about more than 20% of the time, the buoyancy is important for the dispersion. And if we want to look into the maximum value, the extreme scenario, because we want to consider the extreme scenario for the urban climate resilience analyze. So in that case, the buoyancy will play an extremely important role in our urban area. So that is my answer. Thank you.
So let's thank our speaker again.